It's said that life has a way of tying up loose ends when you least expect it. But sometimes, those knots come undone with a single glance, one that chills you to your core. I don't know where you're listening from tonight. Maybe you're holding an old photograph, or remembering someone who once filled a room with laughter that now echoes only in your memory. It doesn't matter what time it is, but I promise you, today's story will reach into the deepest corners of your heart and remind you that miracles still walk among us, often wearing the smallest shoes. Our story begins in the heart of Chicago, under the weary gray sky of a late autumn afternoon. The wind carries the scent of burning leaves and distant coffee from the cafes below. But 30 floors up, in a penthouse that touches the clouds, none of those earthly fragrances can penetrate the sterile perfection of glass and steel. Here, surrounded by the cold gleam of his empire, sat a man whose wealth was measured not in millions, but in billions, whose portfolio stretched across continents, whose investments in tech stocks and cryptocurrency had made him one of the most powerful figures in America's financial landscape. His name was Robert Albright, and his loneliness was deeper than Lake Michigan itself. The tick-tock of the imported Swiss clocks in his high-rise suite seemed muffled, as if time itself had paused, waiting for something, anything, to stir the suffocating stillness. But nothing did. Only an empty leather armchair sat in the corner, Italian leather, worth more than most people's annual salary, yet it held nothing but shadows and the ghost of his past. A silent witness to a pain that no amount of money could heal. Robert's world was architecturally perfect, designed by the finest minds, furnished with pieces that graced museum walls. His assets were diversified across real estate, gold reserves, and cutting-edge technology ventures. He owned properties in Manhattan, Malibu, and the Swiss Alps. His net worth fluctuated by millions daily as markets opened and closed across time zones. Yet, beneath this foundation of endless capital, everything was cracked, broken, held together by nothing more than habit and the stubborn refusal to feel. The windows of his penthouse were sealed, climate-controlled perfection that refused to let in Chicago's unpredictable autumn air with its promises of change and renewal. In Robert's crystal world, emotions were threats to be contained, variables to be controlled, risks to be minimized. So he lived among shadows, surrounded by the machinery of wealth generation, multiple monitors displaying stock prices, cryptocurrency fluctuations, real-time reports from his various business ventures, yet feeling none of the satisfaction that his financial advisors assumed such success should bring. Each morning, Robert Albright woke to reports of his growing fortune. His investments in emerging technologies had yielded returns that made headlines in the Wall Street Journal. His Bitcoin holdings alone were worth more than some small country's GDP. His dividend income from blue-chip stocks provided enough passive income to fund small cities. Yet, as he stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, watching the sunrise paint Chicago's skyline in gold, he felt nothing but the familiar weight of emptiness pressing against his chest like a cold stone. The financial world knew Robert as a genius, the man who could predict market trends with uncanny accuracy, who had turned a modest inheritance into a multi-billion-dollar empire before his 40th birthday. Forbes had featured him on their cover 3 times. Bloomberg interviewed him quarterly. Young entrepreneurs studied his investment strategies in business schools across the nation, but they didn't know about the dust-covered family portraits hidden in the locked room down the hall, or the way his hands shook each morning as he drank his coffee alone at a dining table built for 12. More than a decade ago, Robert's greatest treasure had vanished from his life like smoke in the wind. Sarah, the baby he had cradled in his arms, whose tiny fingers had wrapped around his thumb with the strength of absolute trust, had been ripped away by circumstances that no amount of wealth could overcome. Custody battles fought with the most expensive lawyers money could hire. Bitter court rulings that reduced a father's love to visitation schedules and financial obligations. Distant relatives who appeared from nowhere, claiming blood rights stronger than the bonds of daily care. His daughter was gone, and with her, his capacity for joy had died. He had locked away her memory much like those portraits gathering dust, sealed behind doors that would never open, preserved but unreachable. The lawyers had taken their fees, the judges had rendered their verdicts, and Robert had learned the cruelest lesson of all, that there are some things money cannot buy, some losses that wealth cannot reverse, some wounds that compound interest cannot heal. In the years that followed, Robert threw himself into the machinery of accumulation with the desperation of a drowning man. Each successful deal, each profitable investment, each expansion of his financial empire was an attempt to fill the void where his heart once lived. He acquired companies like other men collected souvenirs. His hedge fund consistently outperformed the market. His real estate investments appreciated faster than inflation. His diversified portfolio weathered every economic storm with remarkable resilience. Yet, prosperity felt like punishment, success like a sentence he could never complete. The people in Robert's life existed at arm's length: employees, advisors, business associates who spoke to him in the language of profit margins and growth potential. His assistant scheduled his days to the minute. His financial team managed his assets with algorithmic precision. His security detail monitored his safety with military efficiency. But human warmth, the simple pleasure of unguarded conversation, the healing touch of someone who cared about him rather than his bank balance. These luxuries remained beyond his reach, more precious and elusive than any treasure his money could acquire. He hated weakness in himself and others. He despised being reminded of the fragility he had once embraced, the vulnerability he had once celebrated. Children's laughter made him turn away. Family photographs on his employees' desks irritated him beyond reason. Christmas decorations, birthday parties, anniversary celebrations, all the small rituals that marked the passage of love through time, struck him as elaborate frauds, pretty lies people told themselves to avoid confronting the stark truth that loss was inevitable and happiness was temporary. So Robert Albright lived his carefully controlled existence, measuring time not in moments of connection, but in portfolio performance, not in the warmth of human company, but in the cold satisfaction of another successful acquisition. His heart had become a locked vault, his emotions frozen assets that generated no return, his capacity for joy a commodity he had sold long ago without realizing its true value. One cold afternoon in late October, the kind of day Chicago is famous for, when the wind off Lake Michigan carries winter's first warning and rattles the bare branches of the elms in Millennium Park, Robert found himself walking the downtown streets instead of riding in his usual chauffeur-driven sedan. It wasn't a planned deviation from routine. His car had broken down, a small mechanical failure that had forced him into the unfamiliar experience of navigating his city on foot. The sidewalks pulsed with the energy of people who worked for their money rather than watching it multiply invisibly in offshore accounts. Street vendors sold hot dogs that filled the air with the scent of mustard and grilled onions. Business people clutched coffee cups like lifelines, their breath visible in small puffs of steam. Students hurried between classes, their backpacks weighted with dreams that money couldn't purchase. As Robert made his way through this foreign landscape of ordinary human activity, something caught his attention near the park's entrance. A small figure moved with focused intensity in the open square, practicing what appeared to be martial arts forms. Not the polished demonstration of a professional instructor with expensive equipment and designer athletic wear, but something raw, more authentic, the determined training of someone who had learned to fight because the world had given her no choice. She was a girl no older than 9, her movements precise but unrefined, like a diamond rough-cut but brilliant. The worn sneakers on her feet had seen countless miles of pavement. The faded jacket draped over a nearby bench spoke of careful budgeting and second-hand purchases. Her dusty ponytail caught the afternoon light as she moved through her forms with a concentration that seemed almost meditative, completely absorbed in the rhythm of her practice. Robert felt a familiar surge of irritation, the same contempt that rose in him whenever he encountered evidence of the world's casual disorder. "What's a girl like that doing wasting time here?" he muttered under his breath, his words forming small clouds in the cold air. She should be in school, or nowhere near this part of town. To his orderly mind, this child represented everything chaotic and unpredictable about the human condition. Uncontrolled, unmanaged, a disturbance in the careful geometry of urban planning. But then, as if summoned by his judgment, the world shifted on its axis in the way that fate sometimes arranges when it has grown tired of our certainties. 3 figures emerged from the shadows between buildings, young men with the predatory ease of those who had learned to take what they wanted from those who appeared too weak to resist. They moved toward Robert with the casual confidence of wolves approaching isolated prey, their intentions written in the aggressive looseness of their posture. Panic seized Robert's chest like a vice made of ice. For all his wealth, for all his power in boardrooms and financial markets, he was physically soft, intellectually formidable, but corporally vulnerable. His assets couldn't protect him here. His cryptocurrency couldn't deflect a fist. His diversified portfolio meant nothing to young men whose only investment strategy involved intimidation and violence. The first fist was already moving toward his face when something extraordinary happened. The girl, the scrappy child whose presence had annoyed him moments before, launched herself into the conflict with the fluid grace of water becoming lightning. Her small frame moved with devastating efficiency, each strike calculated not for maximum damage, but for optimal effectiveness. A kick to destabilize, an elbow to disorient, a sweep to unbalance. The 3 attackers found themselves facing not a helpless child, but a force of nature compressed into a 90-pound form that fought with the precision of someone who had learned that survival often depended on making larger opponents reconsider their assumptions. Within moments, the would-be muggers scattered like leaves before the wind, their bravado evaporating in the face of unexpected resistance. Robert stood frozen, his expensive wool coat disheveled, his carefully styled hair mussed, staring at his unlikely savior with the bewilderment of a man whose understanding of the world had just been fundamentally challenged. This child, this girl he had dismissed as a nuisance, whose presence he had found irritating, had just saved him from robbery or worse. "Are you okay, mister?" she asked, her voice carrying the slight breathlessness of recent exertion, but no trace of fear or pride. She spoke as if rescuing grown men from street criminals was simply part of her typical afternoon routine. As Robert looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, something on her narrow wrist stopped his heart. A delicate silver bracelet caught the late afternoon sunlight, its tiny charms dancing with each movement of her hand. The metalwork was distinctive, elegant in its simplicity, each charm carefully chosen and precisely placed. Robert's breath caught in his throat because he recognized every detail of that jewelry with the perfect clarity of a memory that had been preserved in amber for 10 long years. It was the same bracelet, the exact same design, the same engravings, the same pattern of small figures that he had commissioned from a boutique jeweler in Lincoln Park when Sarah was still an infant. A custom piece, one of a kind, created as a christening gift that would grow with her, expanding like love itself to accommodate the passage of time. He had placed it on his daughter's tiny wrist the day before the custody hearing that would tear his world apart, hoping it would carry his love to wherever the courts might send her. The sight of that bracelet on this street-smart girl's arm sent Robert's carefully constructed emotional walls crashing down like buildings in an earthquake. His knees nearly buckled as the implications washed over him in waves of hope and terror. Could it be possible? Could this fierce child who had just defended him with such skill and composure be the baby he had kissed goodbye a decade ago? Could fate have arranged this impossible coincidence, this meeting that felt simultaneously random and inevitable? At first, Robert's mind rejected the possibility with the ruthless logic that had built his financial empire. His world demanded proof, documentation, verifiable facts that could be audited and confirmed. Miracles were for people who couldn't afford to deal in reality. Coincidences were statistical aberrations that meant nothing. The suggestion that this street-hardened girl could somehow be connected to his lost daughter was the kind of wishful thinking that led to poor investment decisions and emotional bankruptcy. "Where did you get that bracelet?" Robert asked, his voice sharp with barely controlled desperation, cracking on the final syllable like ice under pressure. He struggled to maintain his composure, to project the authority of a man accustomed to getting answers to his questions, but his tone betrayed the tremor of a father's hope wrestling with a billionaire's skepticism. The girl, who would later tell him her name was Lily, met his gaze without flinching, her dark eyes holding a calmness that seemed impossibly mature for someone her age. There was no defensiveness in her posture, no fear of his intensity, just the patient steadiness of someone who had learned early that adults often asked questions they weren't prepared to hear answered. "My mother gave it to me," she replied softly, her words carrying the weight of a secret the universe had kept hidden too long. "She said it belonged to my sister, the one who went away before I was born." The simplicity of her response hit Robert like a physical blow. His sister. The words echoed in his mind with the resonance of truth recognizing itself. If this girl was telling the truth, if the bracelet had somehow passed from Sarah to another child in the same family, then the implications were staggering. It would mean that his daughter had existed somewhere in the world all these years, that she had worn his gift and perhaps remembered the father who had given it to her with such love. But Robert's emotional sophistication had atrophied during his years of self-imposed isolation. He responded to vulnerability the only way he knew how, with accusations, suspicion, and the cruel assumption that everyone wanted something from him. His wealth had taught him to view human kindness as a transaction, generosity as a negotiation, and love as a commodity with a price that could be calculated and exploited. "You're lying," he said harshly, stepping back as if physical distance could protect him from hope. "Someone told you to approach me. Someone saw me walking here and sent you with that bracelet and some sob story designed to get money out of me." His voice grew louder, more brittle, a rich man's rage fueled by terror of being deceived again. "How much do you want? What's the scheme? Who's paying you to manipulate me?" The cruelty of his words hung in the air between them like poison gas. Other pedestrians glanced their way, witnessing what appeared to be a wealthy man berating a child who had just saved him from assault. But Lily didn't recoil from his accusations. She didn't cry or run or respond with anger of her own. Instead, she regarded him with the kind of compassion usually reserved for wounded animals, her young face reflecting not hurt, but understanding. "I'm sorry someone hurt you so bad you can't tell the difference between trying to help and trying to hurt," she said quietly, her words cutting through his defenses with surgical precision. "I don't want your money, mister. I was just practicing my forms when those guys showed up. My mom taught me to help people when they're in trouble, even if they're mean to me afterward." Something in her tone, the absence of guile, the presence of wisdom earned through experiences no child should endure, began to crack the shell of Robert's cynicism. He could see in her eyes a depth that no amount of coaching could manufacture, a kind of spiritual resilience that couldn't be bought or sold. This was not the calculated performance of a con artist, but the authentic response of someone who had learned to find strength in gentleness, power in service. Yet, accepting the possibility that this encounter was genuine, that this child might somehow be connected to his lost daughter, would require Robert to risk the one thing his wealth couldn't replace: hope. And hope, he had learned the hard way, was the most expensive investment a man could make, with the highest potential for catastrophic loss. Days passed, and Robert found himself drawn back to Millennium Park with the compulsion of a man trying to solve the equation that would unlock the meaning of his existence. He told himself he was simply ensuring that the area was safe for pedestrians, that he had a civic duty to monitor potential criminal activity in the financial district. But the truth was more complicated and more frightening. He was searching for Lily with the desperation of a drowning man reaching for a life preserver. When he found her, she was training again, her small form moving through martial arts kata with the same focused intensity he had witnessed before. But now Robert watched her differently, seeing not chaos but discipline, not disturbance but dedication. Her technique was largely self-taught, he realized, developed through necessity rather than formal instruction. Each movement carried the weight of real experience, the kind of knowledge that came from facing genuine threats rather than practicing in comfortable dojos. There was something almost mystical about her presence in that urban space. The afternoon light seemed to gather around her as she moved, framing her practice in a golden aureole that made the concrete and steel of downtown Chicago fade into soft focus. Pigeons that normally scattered at human approach lingered near her feet as if drawn by some invisible magnetism. Even the ever-present noise of traffic seemed muted when she was in motion, as though the city itself was holding its breath to watch this small miracle of grace and determination. Robert began visiting the park regularly, always maintaining what he told himself was a professional distance. He would position himself on benches 30 yards away, pretending to read financial reports on his tablet while actually observing Lily's routine. He noted that she arrived each day at precisely 3:30, practiced for exactly 1 hour, and left by 5 o'clock with military punctuality. Her dedication was absolute, her focus unbreakable, her commitment to improvement evident in the subtle refinements he observed in her technique week by week. Small changes began occurring in Robert's sterile penthouse, alterations so gradual he almost didn't notice them at first. One morning, he realized that the sealed windows had been opened overnight, not by his housekeeping staff, who had strict instructions about maintaining climate control, but mysteriously, as if the building itself had decided to breathe. Chicago's autumn air swirled through his apartment, carrying scents of wood smoke and approaching winter, reminders of seasons and cycles that his controlled environment had blocked for years. The stopped clocks scattered throughout his penthouse, expensive timepieces that had frozen at various moments, creating a museum of suspended time, began ticking again. First one, then another, until the entire apartment resonated with the gentle rhythm of passing seconds. Robert found the sound disturbing at first, then oddly comforting, as if his home was slowly coming back to life after a long period of artificial hibernation. His sleep patterns shifted as well. For years, Robert had relied on prescription medications to achieve unconsciousness, his mind too agitated by financial concerns and emotional emptiness to find natural rest. But now he found himself sleeping more deeply, dreaming in vivid colors for the first time in a decade. The dreams were strange but beautiful. Images of light breaking through clouds, small hands reaching toward vast skies, voices singing songs he almost remembered from childhood. Even his relationship with food began to change. Robert had eaten for years with mechanical efficiency, consuming expensive meals prepared by a private chef but tasting nothing, nourishing his body while starving his soul. Now he found himself craving simple foods: hot chocolate on cold afternoons, fresh bread with real butter, soup that steamed and warmed from within. His digestive system, stressed by years of emotional tension, began to relax and heal. It was as though Lily's presence and his awareness was gradually unfreezing parts of Robert that had been locked in permafrost for a decade. The child didn't even know she was having this effect on him, but her very existence seemed to generate healing energy that penetrated his defenses like sunlight melting winter ice. Her innocence acted as a catalyst for his long-suppressed capacity for wonder. Her courage inspired his dormant ability to hope. The financial markets continued their eternal dance of rise and fall, but Robert found himself less obsessed with tracking every fluctuation in his portfolio's value. His smartphone, which once demanded constant attention with notifications about stock prices and cryptocurrency trends, remained silent for longer periods as his focus shifted from accumulation to something he couldn't yet name but was beginning to recognize as recovery. One afternoon in early November, as the first snow began dusting Chicago's streets with promise of winter's approach, Lily looked directly at Robert across the park square. Their eyes met with the inevitable certainty of two souls recognizing their connection across the vast distance of circumstance and fear. She smiled, not the calculated expression of someone seeking advantage, but the spontaneous warmth of a child acknowledging a friend. To Robert's amazement, she walked toward him, her approach unhurried but purposeful. His first instinct was to flee, to retreat to the safety of his penthouse and pretend this moment wasn't happening. But something kept him rooted to the bench, some deeper wisdom that whispered this encounter was both inevitable and necessary. "You watch me practice every day," Lily said, not as an accusation, but as a simple observation. "Are you interested in martial arts, or are you just lonely?" The directness of her question stunned Robert into a moment of absolute honesty. "I think," he said slowly, choosing his words like a man navigating a minefield of his own emotions, "I might be both." Lily nodded as if this made perfect sense. "My mom says loneliness makes people do strange things. But she also says sometimes strange things lead to wonderful friendships." She paused, studying his face with the penetrating gaze of someone who had learned to read adult emotions for survival purposes. "Would you like to meet my mom? She makes really good hot chocolate, and she knows lots of stories about where people come from." The invitation was simple, innocent, and absolutely terrifying. Robert realized that accepting would mean stepping across a threshold he couldn't uncross, entering a world where his wealth meant nothing and his vulnerability meant everything. It would require him to trust again, to hope again, to risk the kind of emotional investment that could bankrupt his spirit if it went wrong. But as he looked at Lily's expectant face, at the silver bracelet catching afternoon sunlight on her wrist, Robert felt something shift deep in his chest. For the first time in 10 years, the prospect of human connection seemed less frightening than the guarantee of continued isolation. "I would like that very much," he heard himself saying, his voice stronger than he expected. "I would like that very much indeed." Grace Martinez worked 2 jobs to keep her small family afloat in a world that often seemed designed to sink people who couldn't afford life preservers. By day, she cleaned offices in downtown Chicago, invisible to the executives whose wastebaskets she emptied and whose windows she wiped clean. By night, she stocked shelves at a grocery store in Pilsen, surrounded by the familiar sounds of Spanish conversation and the comforting smells of foods that reminded her of the Mexico she had left behind in search of better opportunities for her daughters. Meeting Robert Albright in the tiny kitchen of her 2-bedroom apartment was like watching 2 different universes attempt to occupy the same space. His expensive suit, even when he tried to dress casually, seemed to gleam with the unmistakable patina of serious wealth. His hands, soft from years of handling nothing heavier than financial documents, contrasted sharply with her calloused palms, marked by honest labor and the daily struggle to create comfort from almost nothing. Grace had heard Lily's account of the park encounter, had examined the business card Robert nervously offered, had even done her own internet research about this mysterious billionaire who claimed an interest in her daughter's welfare. What she found both impressed and worried her. Robert Albright was legitimate, wealthy beyond comprehension, and apparently as emotionally damaged as a man could be while still functioning in the world. "Mr. Albright," Grace said, offering him coffee in a mug that had cost $3 at a discount store, "I need to understand why a man with your resources is interested in spending time with a 9-year-old girl from Pilsen. I've worked for rich people most of my adult life, and in my experience, they don't usually seek out friendships with families like ours unless they want something we can't afford to give." Her directness cut through the small talk Robert had been attempting, forcing him to confront the question that had been haunting him since that first day in the park. What did he want from this family? What was he hoping to find in their modest apartment that his penthouse couldn't provide? And how could he explain an attraction he didn't fully understand himself? "I lost a daughter 10 years ago," Robert said quietly, staring into his coffee as if the answers might be floating among the cream swirls. "Not to death, to a custody dispute that tore my heart out and left me wondering every day where she might be, whether she's happy, whether she ever thinks about the father who loved her but couldn't protect her from the legal system." Grace's expression softened slightly, recognizing the universal pain of parental loss, even when its circumstances were foreign to her own experience. She had worked hard to keep her girls safe and together, but she understood the terror that lived in every parent's heart, the fear that forces beyond their control might rip their children away forever. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said, meaning it, "but I still don't understand what that has to do with Lily." Robert looked up from his coffee, his eyes meeting Grace's with vulnerable honesty. "She wears a bracelet that I gave to my daughter. The same design, the same engravings, the exact same piece of jewelry. Either it's the most unlikely coincidence in history, or somehow that bracelet found its way from Sarah to Lily, which would mean—" He paused, unable to voice the hope that felt too large and fragile to survive spoken words. "Which would mean your daughter and my Lily are connected somehow," Grace finished quietly. "Which would mean Sarah might be Elena, the sister Lily remembers in dreams but never met in waking life." The possibility hung between them like a bridge neither dared to cross fully, too beautiful to ignore and too dangerous to embrace without reservation. They sat in silence for several minutes, adult caution wrestling with parental longing, practical wisdom battling against the heart's desperate desire to believe in miracles. Lily entered the kitchen then, fresh from washing her hands, her presence immediately lightening the emotional atmosphere. She moved with unconscious grace between the two adults, sensing the weight of their conversation, but not burdened by its implications. To her, Robert was simply the lonely man from the park who needed friendship. And friendship was something she had always given freely regardless of circumstances. "Did you tell him about the dreams?" Lily asked her mother, settling onto Robert's lap with the casual intimacy of a child who had never been taught to fear adult intentions. "What dreams?" Robert asked, his voice careful but curious. Lily looked at him with those impossibly wise eyes. "I dream about a sister sometimes. She's older than me, and she lives in a big house with lots of windows. In the dreams, she's always trying to come home, but she can't find the way. She wears the same bracelet as me, and she cries for a papa who smells like expensive cologne and has gentle hands." The description hit Robert like physical impact, forcing him to grip the table for support. The details were too specific, too accurate to be coincidence. His cologne was indeed expensive, custom blended by a specialist in New York. His hands, despite their softness from luxurious living, had indeed been gentle when holding his infant daughter. And Sarah, in the last weeks before the custody battle concluded, had often seemed lost, confused by the legal proceedings that would separate her from the only parent she had ever known. "Lily sometimes talks in her sleep," Grace added softly. "She calls out for someone named Papa, speaks words in English even though she learned Spanish first. She draws pictures of places she's never been, tall buildings, fancy cars, rooms with more space than our whole apartment. I've always assumed they were just childhood fantasies, but now you think they might be memories," Robert finished, his rational mind struggling to process information that defied logical explanation, but felt true on a cellular level. The three of them spent the remainder of that evening sharing stories, carefully exploring the possibility that fate had arranged this meeting across years of separation and miles of social distance. Grace described finding Lily as a toddler, abandoned at a social services center with nothing but the silver bracelet and a note saying her name was Elena Martinez, that she needed a loving home, and that she was special in ways that would become clear with time. Robert shared memories of Sarah's infancy, the songs he used to sing to help her sleep, the way she would grip his finger while drinking her bottle, the sound of her laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent too long. As he spoke, Lily nodded occasionally, as if recognizing elements of a story she had always known but never had confirmed. The evening ended without definitive answers, but with a sense that something important had begun, a process of healing that might take years to complete, but had already started to transform all three of their lives. Robert left Grace's apartment walking differently, standing straighter, breathing more deeply than he had in a decade. The November air felt crisp and alive against his skin, full of possibilities he had forgotten existed. Over the next several weeks, Robert became a regular visitor to the Martinez household, always bringing gifts that were thoughtful rather than extravagant. Art supplies for Lily, flowers for Grace, groceries to supplement their careful budget. He began contributing to their rent payments, not as charity, but as investment in his own education about how families functioned, how love was expressed through small daily actions rather than grand financial gestures. Lily taught Robert how to make paper airplanes, how to identify different cloud formations, how to find North Star even in the city's light pollution. She showed him that wonder didn't require wealth, that joy could be manufactured from nothing more than attention and imagination. Her favorite activity was practicing martial arts while Robert watched, occasionally offering suggestions, but mostly marveling at her natural ability and absolute dedication. Grace taught Robert how to cook simple meals, how to find satisfaction in tasks that served others rather than enriching himself. She shared stories of her own journey from Mexico, the dreams she had carried across borders, and the compromises she had made to build a safe life for her daughters. Her resilience impressed him more than any business strategy he had ever studied. Her ability to create abundance from scarcity seemed more miraculous than any market performance he had achieved. But most importantly, both Grace and Lily taught Robert how to be present in his own life, how to experience moments fully rather than treating time as another commodity to be managed efficiently. They showed him that relationships were investments that paid dividends in happiness rather than dollars, that the most valuable assets couldn't be quantified in any portfolio analysis. The change in Robert was visible to everyone who knew him. His assistant noticed that he smiled more often during business meetings, that he seemed less driven by the compulsive need to acquire and control. His financial advisors observed that he was diversifying his investments in new directions, funding education programs, supporting community centers, exploring philanthropic opportunities that aligned with his evolving values rather than merely optimizing tax advantages. Most significantly, Robert began sleeping through the night without medication, waking refreshed and eager to see what each day might bring. The stopped clocks in his penthouse all kept accurate time now, marking hours filled with purpose rather than mere duration. His appetite returned, not just for food, but for life itself, for experiences that nourished his soul alongside his body. Yet beneath this growing happiness, a current of anxiety ran like an underground river. Robert couldn't shake the fear that this newfound joy was temporary, that fate might snatch it away as suddenly as it had appeared. He had been wealthy long enough to know that everything had a price, that happiness was often the most expensive luxury of all, payable in full when you least expected the bill to come due. His fears proved prophetic on a cold December evening when Grace's phone rang with news that would threaten to destroy everything they had built together. Elena Martinez, the name Lily had carried when Grace found her, was not an abandoned child as the social services paperwork had indicated. She was the center of an ongoing legal investigation, a custody case that had been suspended but never officially resolved, involving a father who had been searching for his missing daughter for 10 years. The call came from a family court administrator informing Grace that recently discovered evidence suggested Elena might be Sarah Albright, subject to a custody dispute that predated her adoption. If true, it would mean that Lily's entire legal status was in question, that her life with Grace could be challenged in court by a biological father who had never stopped looking for his daughter. Grace's hands shook as she explained the situation to Robert, watched him process the implications with the careful analysis of someone accustomed to evaluating complex legal scenarios. This wasn't the joyful reunion they had all been hoping for, but a potential legal battle that could destroy the family bonds they had worked so hard to create. "What do we do?" Grace asked, fear making her voice smaller than usual. Robert looked at Lily, who was sleeping peacefully on the couch, unaware that her world was about to be shaken by forces beyond her understanding or control. "We do what's best for her," he said quietly. "Whatever that might be, regardless of what it costs us personally." It was a promise that would be tested in ways none of them could imagine, a commitment to prioritize a child's welfare over adult desires, no matter how painful the consequences might prove to be. The legal proceedings that followed moved with glacial slowness, each hearing and deposition adding layers of complexity to what should have been a simple question of identity and custody. DNA tests confirmed what their hearts had already known. Lily was indeed Sarah, Robert's biological daughter, separated from him by a legal system that had prioritized procedure over human connection, bureaucracy over love. But 10 years of separation had created bonds and identities that couldn't be dissolved by laboratory results. Lily knew Grace as her mother, Pilsen as her neighborhood, Spanish as her first language, poverty as her reality. The Martinez family represented everything she understood about safety, love, and belonging. The prospect of being uprooted from this stability, regardless of biological truth, filled her with anxiety that she tried to hide from the adults who were fighting to protect her. Robert found himself in the impossible position of having found his daughter only to risk losing her again, this time to the very legal system that had taken her from him originally. His wealth, which had failed to protect Sarah a decade earlier, seemed equally powerless now to navigate the complex emotional landscape of a child who bore his DNA but called another woman mother. Grace prepared herself for the possibility of losing the daughter she had raised from toddlerhood, the child who had healed her own heart after years of loneliness and struggle. Her love for Lily was no less real for being legally vulnerable, no less profound for lacking biological foundation. She had changed diapers, nursed fevers, celebrated birthdays, provided comfort during nightmares, the daily acts of parenting that created family bonds deeper than genetics. The court appointed child psychologists to evaluate Lily's emotional state, social workers to assess her living situation, legal advocates to represent her interests separate from the competing claims of the adults who loved her. Each professional brought their own expertise and limitations to a situation that defied standard protocols, a case study in how the intersection of law, love, and loss could create problems for which no precedent existed. Through it all, Lily displayed remarkable resilience and wisdom, seeming to understand that the adults in her life were struggling with forces larger than their individual desires. She continued practicing martial arts in the park, finding peace in routine and physical discipline while everything else in her world shifted like sand beneath her feet. Her training became meditative, a moving prayer for stability in the midst of chaos. Robert watched his newly discovered daughter navigate this crisis with pride and heartbreak intermingled. Here was evidence of the strength and grace she had inherited from him, combined with the practical wisdom Grace had taught her. Lily was becoming someone extraordinary, a child who could bridge worlds, who possessed both biological connection to privilege and earned understanding of struggle. The turning point came during a court hearing in late January, when Lily was asked to express her own preferences about custody arrangements. The judge, expecting the typical childhood confusion of a girl torn between competing loyalties, instead heard testimony that stunned everyone present with its clarity and compassion. "I love my Mama Grace," Lily said, looking directly at the judge with steady composure. She saved me when I was little and scared. She taught me how to be brave and kind and strong. She's my mother in every way that matters, and I never want to be separated from her." The courtroom held its breath, expecting her to reject Robert entirely. Instead, she turned to face him with eyes full of recognition and affection. "And I love my papa, Robert, too. He's the father I dreamed about before I knew he was real. He's lonely and sad, but he's good inside, and he needs someone to help him remember how to be happy. I want to love them both, because that's what families do. They love each other even when it's complicated." Her words cut through months of legal maneuvering with the simple truth that love doesn't follow jurisdictional boundaries, that families can be created through choice as well as biology, that children often understand emotional mathematics better than the adults who claim to protect them. What followed wasn't a traditional custody arrangement, but something unprecedented, a collaborative agreement that recognized both Grace's role as Lily's primary parent and Robert's rights as her biological father. Instead of choosing between worlds, Lily would inhabit both, spending time in the penthouse and the modest apartment, learning to navigate privilege and poverty with equal grace. Robert used his resources not to claim ownership of his daughter, but to support the family that had nurtured her through her formative years. He established trust funds for both Lily and Grace, ensuring financial security without creating dependence. He hired the best lawyers to make Grace's guardianship legally unshakable, protecting the bond they had created through years of daily love and care. More importantly, he began learning how to be a father to a child who already had a mother, how to add to Lily's life without subtracting from her established relationships. It required humility he had never learned in business school, patience that couldn't be purchased with money, wisdom that came only through surrender to forces greater than individual will. The process of building this unprecedented family structure took months of careful negotiation, emotional excavation, and mutual trust building. Grace had to overcome years of protective instincts that viewed wealthy men as threats to her daughter's welfare. Robert had to surrender his lifelong need for control, accepting that love meant sharing rather than possessing. Lily had to become a bridge between worlds, translating between different languages of affection and belonging. But something beautiful emerged from this complex arrangement, a family that was stronger for being voluntary, bonds that were deeper for being chosen rather than merely inherited. Grace discovered that sharing Lily's love didn't diminish her importance as a mother, but expanded the child's capacity for joy. Robert learned that being a father meant serving his daughter's happiness rather than claiming ownership of her future. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came a sense of renewal that touched every aspect of their interconnected lives. Robert's penthouse, once a museum of isolation and grief, began receiving regular visits from a 9-year-old who brought laughter to rooms that had forgotten how to echo with happiness. His expensive furniture acquired juice stains and crayon marks, evidence of life being lived instead of merely displayed. Grace found her financial anxieties easing for the first time in years, not because she had become dependent on Robert's wealth, but because she finally had a partner in the enormous task of raising a child with special gifts and complex needs. The burden of single parenthood, which she had carried with fierce independence for so long, could finally be shared with someone who loved Lily as much as she did. Most remarkably, Lily blossomed in ways that neither adult could have imagined. Having two committed parents, two different perspectives on life, two distinct but complementary forms of love, seemed to unlock potential that had been constrained by the limitations of any single environment. Her martial arts training improved dramatically when Robert hired professional instructors to supplement what she had learned on her own. Her academic performance soared when Grace's practical wisdom combined with Robert's educational resources. But perhaps most importantly, Lily retained the essential qualities that had made her extraordinary from the beginning. Her compassion for others, her instinct to help those in need, her ability to find joy in simple moments regardless of surrounding circumstances. Prosperity enhanced these traits rather than corrupting them. Privilege became a platform for service rather than a barrier to empathy. Robert discovered that his wealth finally had purpose beyond accumulation. His investment portfolio shifted toward companies that aligned with his evolving values: renewable energy, educational technology, medical research focused on children's health. His charitable foundation, once a tax strategy, became a vehicle for meaningful change in communities like the one where Grace had raised his daughter. The transformation wasn't complete overnight, and it wasn't without challenges. Lily sometimes struggled with the vast differences between her two homes, feeling caught between loyalty to her humble origins and excitement about newfound opportunities. Robert occasionally reverted to old patterns of trying to solve problems with money rather than patience. Grace sometimes worried that she was losing her daughter to a world she couldn't fully understand or navigate. But these growing pains were evidence of authentic change rather than superficial adjustment. They were building something that had never existed before, a family structure that honored multiple truths simultaneously, that recognized love as an expandable resource rather than a zero-sum game, that demonstrated how healing could occur across every boundary that seemed permanent. By summer's end, their unconventional family had found its rhythm. Weekdays usually found Lily with Grace in Pilsen, attending the local school where she had friends who knew her as Elena Martinez, practicing martial arts in the park where she had first encountered Robert. Weekends often meant time in the penthouse, working with tutors who challenged her intellectually, exploring museums and cultural venues that expanded her understanding of the world's possibilities. But the most precious moments happened when all three were together, cooking dinner in Grace's small kitchen while Robert told stories about his business travels, walking along Lake Michigan while Lily pointed out cloud formations that reminded her of different animals, visiting the martial arts studio where she now trained with other children who had overcome difficult circumstances to find strength in discipline and mutual support. These shared experiences created new family traditions that belonged to none of their separate histories, but emerged from their collective commitment to building something better than what any of them could have achieved alone. They were writing a new definition of family, one that prioritized love over law, choice over chance, growth over control. Robert's business associates noticed the change in him, commenting on his improved judgment, his increased patience, his ability to see long-term consequences rather than focusing solely on immediate profits. His investment strategies became more sophisticated, incorporating social impact alongside financial returns. His leadership style evolved from authoritarian to collaborative, reflecting lessons learned in his personal life about the power of shared decision-making. Grace found herself growing in unexpected directions as well. Robert's encouragement and financial support allowed her to pursue educational opportunities she had deferred for years, completing her GED and beginning college coursework in social work. Her first-hand experience navigating systems designed to help families in crisis, combined with her academic study, positioned her to become an advocate for other parents facing legal challenges similar to what she and Robert had overcome. Most remarkably, Lily seemed to absorb the best qualities of both her parents while developing strengths that were uniquely her own. From Grace, she inherited practical wisdom, resilience in the face of adversity, and an understanding that true wealth couldn't be measured in dollars. From Robert, she gained access to educational opportunities, exposure to diverse perspectives, and resources that would allow her to turn her natural compassion into effective action. But her greatest gift was the ability to move between worlds without losing her essential self, to remain grounded in authentic relationships regardless of surrounding luxury, to use privilege as a tool for service rather than separation. She became living proof that children could transcend the limitations of their circumstances without abandoning the values that shaped their character. The winter holidays that year marked the first anniversary of their unconventional family's formation. Instead of celebrating in Robert's penthouse or Grace's apartment, They chose to spend Christmas Eve at the community center where Lily trained, sharing a meal with other families who had found strength in mutual support and collective endeavor. Robert, wearing a simple sweater instead of his usual expensive suits, watched Lily demonstrate martial arts techniques to younger children who looked at her with the same admiration he felt. Grace, radiant with happiness that had taken years to fully emerge, served food to families who reminded her of her own journey from uncertainty to stability. Together, they represented something that transcended individual success or failure. They were evidence that healing was possible, that love could overcome legal obstacles, that families could be created through choice and sustained through commitment. The program that evening included testimonials from community members whose lives had been changed by programs funded through Robert's foundation and administered through organizations Grace had helped identify. Children spoke about educational opportunities that had opened new possibilities. Parents described job training programs that had provided economic stability. Families shared stories of healing that had occurred through services designed to address root causes rather than merely managing symptoms. As Robert listened to these accounts, he realized that his wealth had finally found its purpose. For years, he had accumulated money as protection against loss, building financial walls to defend against emotional vulnerability. But now, his resources served as bridges, connecting his family's healing to the restoration of entire communities, turning private redemption into public service. The evening concluded with Lily leading everyone in a moment of silent reflection, her young voice guiding a room full of adults toward gratitude and hope. "Let's think about people we love," she said, her words carrying across generations and cultures with universal resonance. "And let's promise to help them be happy, even when it's hard, even when we're scared, even when we don't know what's going to happen next." The silence that followed was full rather than empty, pregnant with possibilities rather than heavy with despair. In that moment, Robert felt something he had thought lost forever: the peace that comes from knowing your life has meaning beyond personal satisfaction, that your temporary existence on earth has contributed to permanent improvements in the world's store of love and justice. As they walked home through Chicago's snow-covered streets, Lily between her two parents, each holding one of her hands, Robert reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he had been a man whose wealth meant nothing because his heart was empty. Tonight, he was part of something larger than individual success or failure, a family that proved healing was possible, love was expandable, and miracles still occurred in the most unexpected places. The bracelet on Lily's wrist caught the light from street lamps as they walked, its silver surface reflecting the glow of the city around them. What had begun as a symbol of loss had become evidence of recovery, proof that some things truly are too precious to lose permanently. Love, Robert had learned, was like energy. It could change form but never be destroyed, could be separated but never eliminated, could be buried but never die completely. 3 years later, on a soft spring morning that carried the scent of blooming lilacs and fresh coffee from the street vendors below, Robert Albright sat in the renovated sunroom of his penthouse, watching the sun rise over Lake Michigan while his 12-year-old daughter practiced martial arts on the rooftop garden they had created together. The space bore no resemblance to the sterile monument to isolation it had once been. Plants grew everywhere, not the expensive exotic specimens his decorator had originally suggested, but useful gardens that Grace and Lily tended together, growing vegetables and herbs that ended up in the meals they shared. Children's artwork covered walls that had once displayed only expensive abstractions with no personal meaning. The sound of laughter echoed regularly through rooms that had been silent for too long. Lily had grown into a remarkable young woman, her natural abilities enhanced by opportunities but not corrupted by privilege. She competed in martial arts tournaments, not for trophies, but to test her discipline and encourage younger students who looked to her as both instructor and inspiration. Her academic performance reflected the intelligence she had inherited, combined with the work ethic Grace had modeled throughout her childhood. But most importantly, Lily had become a bridge between worlds, comfortable in penthouse boardrooms, discussing charitable foundation strategies, and equally at home in community centers, organizing support for families facing crisis. She spoke fluent Spanish and English, moved easily between different cultural contexts, and demonstrated daily that wealth could enhance character rather than corrupting it when guided by authentic values. Grace had completed her degree in social work and now served as Director of Family Services for the foundation Robert had restructured around their shared commitment to keeping families together rather than merely managing the aftermath of their separation. Her insights, earned through personal experience with both poverty and the legal systems designed to help families in crisis, informed policies that addressed root causes rather than merely treating symptoms. The unconventional family structure they had created had become a model studied by social workers and family courts across the country. Their success demonstrated that custody disputes could be resolved through collaboration rather than conquest, that children's welfare was best served by expanding their support networks rather than forced choice between competing loyalties. Robert's transformation was evident in every aspect of his life. His business portfolio had evolved from pure profit maximization to impact investing, generating competitive returns while contributing to solutions for homelessness, educational inequality, and family stability. His leadership style had shifted from authoritarian to collaborative, reflecting lessons learned about the power of shared decision-making and mutual respect. But perhaps most remarkably, Robert had learned to measure success differently. His wealth continued to grow, his investments consistently outperformed market averages, his business acumen remained sharp and productive. But these external markers of achievement felt less important than internal indicators of health. His ability to sleep peacefully without medication, his appetite for simple pleasures like shared meals and evening conversations, his capacity to experience joy in moments that cost nothing but attention. The stopped clocks that had once symbolized his emotional paralysis now kept perfect time, marking hours filled with purpose and connection. The sealed windows had been replaced with ones that opened easily, allowing Chicago's changeable weather to flow through spaces that welcomed unpredictability as evidence of life being lived fully. The empty chairs had been joined by furniture scaled for children, art supplies, musical instruments, and all the comfortable chaos that comes with a home designed for living rather than displaying. That morning, as Robert watched Lily move through her training routine with the fluid grace that had first caught his attention 3 years earlier, he reflected on the path that had led them to this moment. The journey had required him to surrender control, to trust in forces larger than individual will, to accept that some investments paid dividends in happiness rather than money. His phone buzzed with the familiar sounds of market opening notifications, cryptocurrency price updates, portfolio performance reports, the digital symphony of wealth management that had once provided his only source of satisfaction. But now these signals seemed like background music rather than the primary melody of his existence. The foreground was occupied by more immediate concerns: Lily's upcoming martial arts competition, Grace's presentation to the City Council about family support services, the foundation board meeting where they would review applications from community organizations seeking funding for innovative programs. A knock at the door interrupted his morning meditation. Grace entered carrying coffee and the latest reports from programs funded through their foundation. Stories of families stabilized, children educated, communities strengthened through resources deployed with precision and care. They had learned to use Robert's business skills and financial resources in service of Grace's understanding of what families actually needed to thrive rather than merely survive. "The Martinez family wants to thank you again," Grace said, settling into the chair beside him and sharing the morning paper. Their youngest daughter received the scholarship for medical school. She's going to specialize in pediatrics. working in community clinics. Robert smiled, remembering the girl they were discussing, a teenager whose academic excellence had been nearly derailed by her family's financial crisis until their foundation's intervention provided stability and opportunity. She was one of dozens of success stories that proved their approach was working, that healing could ripple outward from individual families to entire communities. "That's wonderful news," Robert replied, meaning it completely. But the real credit belongs to her parents and her own hard work. We just removed some of the obstacles that were preventing her potential from flourishing. This was the perspective Robert had gained over 3 years of learning how to be useful rather than merely wealthy. His money could create opportunities, but it couldn't generate character. His resources could remove barriers, but they couldn't provide motivation. His investments could fund programs, but they couldn't heal relationships or inspire personal growth. The most valuable lessons had come from watching Grace and Lily navigate challenges with grace and determination, transforming obstacles into opportunities for growth rather than excuses for surrender. Their resilience had taught him that wealth was most powerful when used to amplify existing strengths, rather than attempting to substitute money for character, resources for relationships, or luxury for love. Lily finished her morning routine and joined them for breakfast, her presence immediately brightening the atmosphere in ways that no interior designer could achieve. At 12, she possessed the kind of integrated wisdom that comes from having experienced both struggle and abundance, understanding their proper relationship to each other and to the larger questions of meaning and purpose that every life must answer. "Papa," she said, using the blend of languages that had become natural in their trilingual household, "I've been thinking about the presentation we're giving to the business school next week. I want to talk about something more than just our family story. I want to help them understand that money isn't math, it's music." Robert looked at her with the mixture of pride and curiosity that had become his default expression when Lily shared her insights. "What do you mean by that?" "Math has right answers and wrong answers," Lily explained, buttering toast with the same focus she brought to martial arts training. "But music has harmony and rhythm and melody that all work together to create something beautiful. Money can be mathematical, just adding and subtracting and maximizing returns. But when it's used like music, it creates harmony between people, rhythm in communities, melodies of hope that keep playing even after the song is over." Grace and Robert exchanged glances across the breakfast table, recognizing once again that their daughter possessed a kind of intelligence that transcended conventional education. Her metaphors emerged from deep understanding rather than clever wordplay, insights that reflected genuine wisdom earned through experience rather than theories learned from textbooks. "That's exactly the right way to think about it," Robert said. "And exactly the right message for those business students to hear. They'll graduate knowing how to make money multiply, but they might never learn how to make it sing." The conversation was interrupted by a call from one of their program directors, reporting success from a pilot project they had funded in Detroit, a community center that provided after-school programming combined with family support services, designed around the same principles that had guided their own healing process. Early results suggested that their model could be scaled and adapted to other cities, other families facing similar challenges around custody disputes, economic instability, and cultural displacement. As Robert listened to the report, he realized how much his understanding of success had evolved. 3 years ago, a phone call like this would have meant nothing to him, just another charitable expense with no meaningful return on investment. Now it represented validation of their entire approach, evidence that healing could ripple outward from individual families to transform entire communities. After the call ended, the three of them spent the morning reviewing foundation business, planning upcoming travel to visit programs they funded, discussing applications from new organizations seeking support. It was work that engaged Robert's analytical skills while serving Grace's commitment to social justice and reflecting Lily's instinct for identifying solutions that addressed root causes rather than merely managing symptoms. The afternoon found them at Lily's martial arts studio, where she taught classes for younger children while Grace provided family support services for parents facing various crises: job loss, housing instability, legal challenges, medical emergencies. Robert often joined these sessions, contributing financial resources, but more importantly, lending his business experience to help parents develop strategic approaches to overcoming seemingly overwhelming obstacles. Watching Lily work with children who reminded him of his own daughter's earlier struggles, Robert marveled at her teaching ability. She had learned to translate complex martial arts principles into simple lessons about balance, focus, perseverance, and respect. More importantly, she demonstrated through her own example that circumstances didn't determine character, that strength could emerge from vulnerability. That leadership meant service rather than dominance. The children adored her not because she was wealthy or privileged, but because she understood their struggles and refused to talk down to them or offer false promises about easy solutions. Her authenticity created trust. Her competence inspired confidence. Her compassion provided hope that their current difficulties were temporary rather than permanent conditions. These teaching sessions had become Robert's favorite part of each week, opportunities to witness his daughter's gifts being deployed in service of others while watching Grace provide the kind of family support that had stabilized their own unconventional household. The studio had become a laboratory for testing approaches that could be documented, refined, and replicated in other communities. As the day drew toward evening, the three of them walked home through Grant Park, past the spot where Robert and Lily had first encountered each other. The site held special significance for all of them, the place where their separate paths had intersected, where healing had begun, where they had started building something that transcended individual success or failure. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met that day?" Lily asked, linking arms with both her parents as they walked through the gathering twilight. "I try not to think about it," Grace replied. "It makes me too grateful for what we have to worry about what we might have missed." Robert nodded agreement, though privately he sometimes did wonder about alternative timelines where his emotional isolation had continued, where Lily had grown up without the opportunities his resources had provided, where Grace had remained trapped in financial anxiety and single parenthood. These counterfactual scenarios scared him more than any market volatility or business risk he had ever faced. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted, "and what I realize is that we were all waiting for each other without knowing it. You were learning the strength and wisdom you would need to teach me how to be a father again. Grace was developing the insight and resilience that would help us build something completely new. I was accumulating resources that would only matter when I finally found the right way to use them." They paused at the exact spot where Lily had defended Robert from the attempted robbery, where the silver bracelet had first caught his attention, where their journey toward becoming a family had begun. The park looked different now, not because anything physical had changed, but because they saw it through eyes transformed by love and shared experience. "I want to tell you something," Robert said, his voice carrying the weight of complete honesty. "Before I met you two, I measured my life by how much money I could make, how many deals I could close, how much control I could exercise over circumstances I was afraid might hurt me again. But now I understand that the only thing worth measuring is how much love we can give and receive, how much healing we can create, how much hope we can generate in the world." Lily squeezed his hand tighter. "And now you know that love multiplies instead of dividing, that healing spreads instead of staying in one place. That hope is the most valuable investment anyone can make." As they continued walking toward home, Robert reflected on the journey that had taught him the difference between being rich and being wealthy. Rich meant having money, wealthy meant having meaning. Rich meant accumulating assets. Wealthy meant amplifying relationships. Rich meant protecting what you owned. Wealthy meant sharing what you had been given stewardship over. The bracelet on Lily's wrist caught the light from street lamps, its silver surface reflecting not just illumination, but the love that had guided its journey from one family to another and back again. What had begun as a symbol of loss had become evidence of recovery, proof that some bonds are stronger than legal documents, some connections deeper than biological inheritance, some healing more powerful than any force that attempts to divide what belongs together. That evening, as the three of them sat together in Robert's transformed penthouse, no longer a museum of isolation, but a home full of laughter, music, conversation, and hope, he felt the peace that comes from knowing his life had found its proper purpose. His wealth had meaning because it served love. His success had significance because it generated healing. His future had promise because it was shared with people who understood that the best investments paid dividends in happiness rather than money. The stopped clocks that had once symbolized his emotional paralysis now kept perfect time, marking moments filled with connection and joy. The sealed windows opened easily to let in Chicago's changeable weather, welcoming unpredictability as evidence of life being lived fully. The empty chairs had been replaced by spaces designed for family, filled with the comfortable chaos that comes when homes prioritize living over displaying. As Robert tucked Lily into bed that night, she asked the question that had become their evening ritual. "Papa, what did you learn today?" "I learned," Robert said, settling into the chair beside her bed, "that the best stories don't have endings. They have beginnings that keep starting over. Our family story isn't finished. It's just getting to the good part where we help other families write their own stories." Lily smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose deepest hopes had been confirmed by daily experience. "And tomorrow we get to help more people learn that love is the only currency that increases when you spend it." After Lily fell asleep, Robert and Grace sat together in the living room, reviewing the day's events and planning tomorrow's activities. Their conversation flowed easily between practical concerns and deeper reflections, between immediate decisions and long-term dreams, between personal satisfaction and public service. "Do you think she understands how special she is?" Grace asked, watching Lily through the open bedroom door. "I think she understands that everyone is special in their own way," Robert replied, "and that specialness is only meaningful when it's shared with others, when it's used to help people discover their own gifts and develop their own potential." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, listening to the sounds of the city beyond their windows, traffic, sirens, voices, music, all the symphony of urban life that had once felt like noise, but now seemed like connection. Chicago had become home for all of them in ways that transcended geography, representing not just a place they lived, but a community they served, not just a location, but a commitment to helping healing ripple outward from individual families to entire neighborhoods. "Robert," Grace said quietly, "I need you to know something. 3 years ago, when this all started, I was prepared to fight you for Lily's sake. I thought wealthy people only took things from families like mine. But you showed me that wealth could be used to protect what families needed rather than threatening what they had built. You helped me understand that abundance could strengthen relationships rather than corrupting them." Robert felt tears gathering in his eyes, not the bitter tears of loss that had defined so much of his adult life, but the gentle moisture that comes with gratitude too large for words. "And you taught me that money without love is just numbers on financial statements, that success without connection is just elaborate loneliness, that healing requires surrender rather than control." As the evening deepened around them, Robert reflected on all the ways their unconventional family had challenged and transformed his understanding of wealth, success, purpose, and meaning. His business portfolio continued to generate impressive returns. His real estate investments appreciated steadily. His cryptocurrency holdings fluctuated with digital market dynamics. But these external markers of financial health felt less important than internal indicators of spiritual prosperity. His ability to sleep peacefully, his appetite for simple pleasures, his capacity for joy in moments that cost nothing but attention. The foundation they had built together was expanding its reach, funding programs in 12 cities, supporting research into family stability interventions, advocating for policy changes that would keep families together rather than managing the aftermath of their separation. Their model was being studied by social workers and family courts, their approach documented and refined for replication in other communities. But perhaps most importantly, they had proven to themselves and others that healing was possible across every boundary that seemed permanent, between rich and poor, between biological and chosen family, between individual success and community service, between past trauma and future hope. As Robert prepared for sleep that night, he looked out across Chicago's skyline and whispered a prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought him to this moment. 3 years ago, he had been a man whose wealth meant nothing because his heart was empty. Tonight, he was part of something larger than individual achievement, a family that proved love could overcome legal obstacles, healing could ripple outward to transform communities, and miracles still occurred in the most unexpected places. The silver bracelet that had started their story rested on Lily's nightstand, catching moonlight through windows that opened easily to let in the city's changeable weather. What had begun as a symbol of loss had become evidence of recovery, proof that some connections are stronger than circumstances, some bonds deeper than biology, some healing more powerful than any force that attempts to divide what belongs together. And you? Have you ever encountered someone small who changed your life in immeasurable ways? Tell me your story in the comments below. Sometimes the most profound transformations come through the smallest hands, the gentlest voices, the most innocent hearts that somehow carry ancient wisdom about what really matters in this brief, beautiful journey we call life. If this story touched something deep within your soul, if it reminded you that miracles still walk among us wearing the smallest shoes, please leave a like and subscribe. Share this message with someone who needs to believe again that healing is possible, that love conquers fear, that families can be created through choice and sustained through commitment. Because somewhere tonight, in cities across America and around the world, there are wealthy hearts that have forgotten how to feel, lonely souls surrounded by luxury but starving for connection, successful people who have lost their way to meaning. And somewhere else, there are small voices carrying big dreams, young hearts full of wisdom, children who understand that love is the only currency that increases when you spend it. May their paths cross when the timing is perfect, when healing is ready to begin, when hope is prepared to bloom in places where it seemed impossible to grow. And may we all remember that the most valuable investments pay dividends in happiness rather than money, that true wealth is measured in relationships rather than assets, and that the best stories don't have endings. They have beginnings that keep starting over, spreading healing and hope wherever love is brave enough to try again.